Okay, you should hear me now. Is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, let's get started.
Then everybody. I would mute all the other participants so that we do not have any background noises. And Jan, you will need to unmute yourself, but that should be no problem. All right, then let's get started.
Okay.
You muted Anne also. So we cannot hear you now.
Yeah.
Anne, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's try it again. So today I want to talk with you about how Rancher helps you deploy Kubernetes clusters. And to start off, I'm based in Germany. I've joined Rancher 8 months ago. And I'm mainly working with people in Europe on Rancher, doing trainings, doing deployments and stuff like that. And Rancher has basically 2 products. So the first one is our open source container management platform. It is called Rancher. And then we also have our very own RancherOS, which is a minimalist Linux distro that does really nothing more than running containers, but that does very good. And so Rancher is quite popular in the open source community. We are distributed as a Docker image, and we have about 2 million downloads in Docker Hub. We went to GA in March last year. And of course, we are 100% open source. So that means we don't have any enterprise versions that we sell. Everything goes back to the open source code. So one of the main characteristics of Rancher is that first of all, we are infrastructure agnostic. That is very important for us. So whether you want to deploy Rancher on bare metal, in your private cloud or in any public cloud, you can do that with Rancher. And also, one of our philosophy is that we don't want to lock you in a specific orchestration. That's why we support a number of Docker orchestrators in Rancher. One of them is Kubernetes, and that is also the most popular amongst our users. Another orchestration engine is K8s, which is developed by us, and that is also quite popular. It's more a simpler orchestrator with not such a steep learning curve as Kubernetes, and it supports Docker Compose. So I mean, a lot of people that start with containers are familiar with Docker Compose, so it's very easy for them to get started with the K8s orchestration engine. We are also multi-tenant and implement a number of centralized controls such as user authentication, audit logging, and role-based access control. Rancher comes shipped with its own load balancer. We also implement a DNS service discovery for the services that are running in Rancher. And most importantly, we also manage our own overlay networking. So that is always a problem if you're doing container deployments with multiple hosts, maybe even located in different zones or regions. Rancher manages a single overlay network. For you, at the moment, we support IPsec networks and VXLAN. But since we are implementing the CNI specification, in the future you will be able to plug in other SDI providers, such as Weave, for example. And last but not least, Rancher also provides persistent storage services. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges, I would say, with Docker containers, is that containers by itself are ephemeral. but there are a number of situations where you really need persistent storage. For example, if you deploy a database as a container or some kind of key value storage, and that is where Rancher helps you deploying persistent storage volumes backed by, for example, NFS, AWS EBS, or EFS. And to get an impression where Rancher sits in your infrastructure, I think this drawing is quite telling. So basically, what you feed to Rancher is pure compute instances. So all that is required is basically the Docker engine. Other than that, we don't really care about if it's a bare metal server or some VM. We support a number of operating systems. The best supported ones are all the RHEL-based OSs and Ubuntu, of course, and then also RancherOS. And on top of that, Rancher manages, as I said, the load balancing, networking, DNS, and storage. And then the next level would be the actual container orchestrator. And that is where you have a choice of 4 orchestrators. The first is Kubernetes. You can also choose to have an environment with Docker Swarm or Marathon, and then also Kettle, which is not in the drawing here. So now to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is currently the leading open source container orchestrator. It's quite popular, and it's used by a number of big enterprises. And it's a lot of users come to Rancher wanting to, looking for a method to manage their Kubernetes clusters. And what Kubernetes basically does is that it automates application deployment, and it makes sure that the applications that you are deploying on top of Kubernetes are healthy. And if there are some issues, it recovers from failures. It also handles scaling of your application and seamless upgrades. And yeah, so I'm going to skip this. And if you look at Kubernetes, at a Kubernetes deployment itself, you can see that it's not a simple deployment. It has consists of many parts, and it can be quite challenging, not only to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, but also to manage it and to maintain it, upgrade it, and make sure it's healthy. So our challenge is that the Kubernetes cluster management should be handled in the same way that Kubernetes itself handles the application on top of it. So here are some of the challenges for managing a Kubernetes environment. So you have to take care of your cloud infrastructure. That is, you have to provision nodes when you scale your environment out. You have to take care of storage. You have to take care of networking, and then also of internal DNS. The second challenge is I mean, a lot of people are just using AWS and using maybe a single region for their deployment, but a lot of people have some requirements where they need to pull in compute nodes from different regions, or they might want to have some multi-region kind of cluster, and that is quite a challenging task as well. And another challenge is managing user access. That is something that Rancher does very well. And then, of course, once you have deployed your Kubernetes cluster, you need some kind of monitoring. And if there's a failure, you want to have full visibility in it, and so that you can then start your recovery procedures. And then Kubernetes development is very fast. They're pushing out a lot of new features every month. So if you want to be on top of the Kubernetes game, upgrading is also a challenge. And then last but not least, for the case that there is a big problem with your state, which is etcd in Kubernetes. You want to have some backup mechanism as well. So here's how Rancher solves this problem. So we ship with our own Kubernetes distribution in Rancher, which is currently 1.5. And we are also an active member in the Kubernetes development community. And yeah, some of our customers include Disney and the UK National Health Services and other big enterprises and government agencies. And this is how we approach the Kubernetes integration in Rancher. So important is that we test and certify every Kubernetes distribution that we push out to the Rancher users. And we simplify the configuration. I mean, Kubernetes has hundreds of configuration flags, and this is really quite challenging. So what we want to do is we want to simplify configuring your Kubernetes cluster. And then we are managing also the load balancer. So Rancher is an ingress controller for Kubernetes, leveraging the built-in level 7 load balancer in Rancher. And as I mentioned before, we manage the cross-host networking, storage, and user management. Yeah, so this is what I addressed. What I mentioned before is a simplified configuration, so that it's really a smaller, more manageable set. And we also, I mean, Kubernetes includes both stable, but also a lot of beta features. So we are making sure that our distribution only includes tested, stable, production-ready features. And of course, all that applies to wherever you deploy your cluster. So it could be your private cloud, could be a public cloud like AWS, DigitalOcean, Google Cloud, or Azure. And this is a little overview over the infrastructure services that we manage. So as I mentioned already, Rancher has a built-in load balancer, which functions as an ingress controller for Kubernetes environment. Currently, it is based on HA proxy, but it is built in a very modular way. So you can actually plug in your own load balancing solution, like Traffic or Nginx reverse proxy, or even you could even interact with some external load balancing solution. And the current cross-host networking is using IPsec or VXLAN. That depends on your environment. If you're in a private cloud, you will probably use the VXLAN because of the overhead for encryption on the IPsec network. And then the storage drivers that I mentioned already. We're also managing credentials for private Docker registries, which most of the deployments will have. Most enterprise deployments, they will not use the Docker Hub. They will have their private registry. And on top of that, also certificates, because we have a load balancer, so we also need to manage certificates for the load balancer. One very important aspect of Rancher is that we support multiple environments in a single Rancher controller, a single Rancher server. So you can stand up very easily a couple of environments in a matter of minutes, really. And you can even mix different orchestration technologies. So you could have a Kubernetes cluster for production, and you could have a Docker or a Cattle cluster for DevOps environments. And yeah, so, and next of all, so the authentication backends in Rancher. Those are currently active. We currently integrate with Active Directory, LDAP, SAML, and GitHub. And there's also a local authentication provider. And the authentication always works at the environment level. So you can have different environments with different users. So you could have, for example, one staging environment that your developers have access to. You could have a production environment that your ops has access to. So this is really something that is a great value in Rancher. So previously we had our own user interface for Kubernetes because the Kubernetes dashboard wasn't really there yet. But we felt that the current state of the Kubernetes dashboard is very good. So in Rancher 1.4, we switched out our own user interface to integrate the native Kubernetes dashboard. And the same is for the catalog. So since the beginning, we had our own Rancher catalog for Kubernetes manifest. But since Helm came out and it's getting widely adopted, we also switched that out. So now by default, we are running a Helm service in Kubernetes environments. So why should you use Kubernetes in Rancher? So first of all, very important, we want to provide a native Kubernetes experience. So we don't do any proprietary stuff. You get full control over your Kubernetes environments with the kube control command line interface, with the Kubernetes dashboard, and we also have a web-based command line that you can use to interact with kube control. The next point is that Rancher provides a no lock-in solution and is 100% open source software. And Rancher manages your upgrades and your deployments. So if you've ever deployed like a Kubernetes from one of the examples in the GitHub repository, you can see that there are instruction and scripts basically for every kind of scenario, like an OpenStack or an AWS, and all those are different, right? So with Rancher, you really get that cloud agnostic deployment capability, where it doesn't matter if your hosts are in AWS or in DigitalOcean or on Azure. It is always the same process. Yeah, so the way you deploy Kubernetes in Rancher, sorry about that, is starts by creating a new environment. And an environment is defined by an environment template, which is customizable. And the first thing that you choose is your orchestration engine. So in that case would be Kubernetes. And then you can decide which of the infrastructure services you want to use from Rancher. So the first one is our health check service that makes sure that the services are always running and restarts or recreates containers that failed. The next is Rancher DNS. You can either use Rancher DNS or Sky DNS for people that are already using Kubernetes. That would tell them something. So the Rancher DNS offers simple DNS-based service discovery, where you just query for the A records of a specific service and then get back all the IP addresses of the containers that offer that service. And with Sky DNS, you're querying the serve records. And then we have a Rancher metadata service. This is quite useful to discover what services are running and to also supply some runtime configuration to services. It's a HTTP-based API. It's very similar to the metadata service that you have, for example, in AWS. And then the network manager manages the overlay network, runs the DNS and metadata service, and does the IP address management. And yeah, so the next thing that you do when you configure your Rancher environment is to choose a overlay network solution. As I already mentioned, we are using CNI to supply networking to containers, and that means you can use any plugins that are available for CNI. I think the list is growing steadily, so I mean, most of the well-known plugins are Weave and Calico, I guess. And the Rancher default plugins that are included are a PSEC, overlay network, and a VXLAN implementation. And finally, as I mentioned before, Rancher provides persistent storage for your containers, and we have a number of implementations for that. Rancher EBS is not on the list, and also NFS. I should also mention NFS. So those supply persistent storage to your pods or to your containers if you're using another orchestrator. And yeah, so let's have a look at the different deployment types for Kubernetes clusters in Rancher. So the first one would be just a simple standalone Kubernetes cluster. What that means is that basically all the Kubernetes services like the API, kubelet, they're running on a single host. Of course, in that scenario, you don't have any resilience, but it's great for testing and stuff like that. Another deployment type would be that you have a number of hosts in your environment where the Kubernetes services are scaled and spread out over multiple hosts, and the etcd has a possibility for failures of single instances. And the last deployment type would be that you separate the data plane. So the data plane is etcd basically in Kubernetes, and the control plane would be all the Kubernetes services like API. So in the resilient separate plane approach, you would deploy the etcd services on their own host, and then the Kubernetes services also on their separate hosts. That would be the most resilient approach for a production environment. And as I already mentioned before, one of the infrastructure services that Rancher uses to manage your Kubernetes environment is a health monitor, health check service. And so this means that your Kubernetes the services are monitored by 3 different health check instances running on different hosts. And when we find that there's a problem with one of the instances, we will either restart the container, recreate the container, or in case of etcd, if you don't have a quorum, so the majority of hosts have failed, for example, we will just alert you, and then you will have to do a disaster recovery or restore a backup. Yeah, that slide is basically what I already said. And yeah, that is also like, so these are the different strategies that the health check service employs. So you can see on the left side, the strategy is just to recreate the container. But in the case of etcd, this wouldn't be a good approach because etcd requires a quorum. So we have another strategy that only recreates the container if there's still a quorum. And what we do also for the etcd part, so for the data part in Kubernetes, is that we are dumping backups in 20 minutes, I think it's 20 minutes interval, to a specific folder on your host. So as long as you have that folder backed by some network storage, you're good on the backup side. And then we make it also very easy in case of a disaster to restore the backups for the data plane, for the etcd. cluster. Yeah, so as I said before, Kubernetes pushes out releases very quickly, and in Rancher we follow the release process. We test new features, and if they are in our new production ready, we put them in our Kubernetes distribution, and then push them out to the Rancher users. And how that works is that in your user interface, you would get an upgrade, basically an upgrade button that tells you that there's an upgrade available. We don't install that automatically, so it's up to you if you want to upgrade to this version. Yeah, so this is basically how it looks like. In the user interface, once there's an upgrade available, you see on the right side there's a yellow button, and then you get some information, some change log on the new version. So let's have a quick look at a quick walkthrough through the UI. So as I said already, Rancher is organized in environments. So the first step would be to create your environment. And as you can see, I already have 3 environments running there. So you just give it a name, then you select, in that case, you would select the Kubernetes orchestration engine. And this deploys just the default template, but you can customize this. And then you can add additional like infrastructure services. So very popular are these integrations for external DNS that create DNS names for your code services. And as we are continuing to integrating more networking plugins like Weave and so on, those will also be available here to choose instead of the IPsec network, for example. And you can also do some configuration, for example, for the overlay network. If there's a conflict with one of your IP spaces, then you can change the CIDR subnet here. Yeah, so once you have created this environment, you just need to add some nodes. So what we do in Rancher, we integrate with Docker Compose. Some of you might have heard of that. It's basically a provisioning application to create resources in the cloud. And the great thing about it is that it supports a really big number of both public clouds, but also private cloud solutions like OpenStack or vSphere. And we leverage their library to create hosts in Rancher. So what you do is, to add a host is, you get this interface here, and all this stuff is also available through our CLI application. So we have a CLI app called Rancher CLI, and you can do everything what you can do in the user interface. You can do that in the command line as well. So here are the pre-configured cloud plugins that Rancher ships in. But as you can see, if you go to manage drivers, oh, why didn't I see that one? I think that's just a demo effect. Okay, you gotta investigate this. So basically, what you could have done there is to add additional cloud providers to it. So let's look at the Amazon EC2 implementation. So this is where you would put in your credentials, and I can just quickly demo that, I guess. And you can write down the credentials. I will delete them later. So, okay, so now you would choose your ability store, but let me get back actually, because I wanted to deploy them in the European region. Yeah, so you select the VPC and subnet in which you want to deploy the host. And then by default, we create a Rancher machine security group. There are basically 2 ports that need to be open in the security group, depending on which overlay networking you use. For the IPsec, that would be the port 4500 UDP. And that allows your hosts to connect to each other and create the overlay network. And we create those automatically, but you can also choose a custom security group here. And then you just give your host a name. You choose how many nodes you want to deploy in AWS. You choose your instance size. You can also specify a custom OS and attach some labels. So, for example, putting a label like this. So you can see now that these hosts are getting provisioned, and this, depending on the cloud, I mean, this takes a couple of minutes or maybe just 2 minutes. AWS always seems to take a little bit more time to provision their VMs. Yeah, let's switch to an existing environment that I created before that has already a number of hosts. So you can see here, we have 3 hosts in AWS, and you can already see what some of the services that are running here. You can see that the Kubernetes dashboard has been deployed to the Kubernetes cluster, the kubedns service, and Tiller for Helm, which is the chart catalog repository. And of course, what this doesn't show is the infrastructure services. So since we deploy Kubernetes itself as containers, we can have a look at the infrastructure stacks. So in infrastructure stacks are the services that are managed by Rancher for your environment. So you can see that we have the health check stack here, the IPsec stack, we have Kubernetes, we have the Ingress controller, and we have a network service stack. So for example, if you go to the Kubernetes stack, you can see that these contains all the native Kubernetes services, like the API, like the kubelet that is running on every host, and the proxy, and this is what the Rancher manages. And you can see there are quite a number of containers running here. And you can also see that they're spread across all hosts if you enable show system. You get a view on what containers are running on each host here. Yeah, and as I said, since the last version, we are shipping the Kubernetes UI. We can have a look at that as well. So you can see I created a zookeeper deployment earlier, and you can run. You can see that running here. Yeah, I think I don't have to explain the Kubernetes UI, but basically you both get some insight on most of the workloads running, and you can also create new applications either by filling out this form or uploading a manifest in Kubernetes. So this is just an alternative to using the kube control command line utility. Most people end up using that, but it's nice for getting an insight what's going on, because you can also get logs for your containers and for your pods. And this is what we previously did in Rancher. ourselves. So now you get the native experience of Kubernetes, the Kubernetes UI. So as I said before, you get the native experience of Kubernetes. So if you want to use the kubectl command line utility, you generate your configuration file here and save it on your desktop. This gives you your credentials and your URL. And for quick test or something like that, you can also have a web-based. You could also have web-based kubectl and also the Helm command line utility. You can use that for quick stuff to do in the UI. And yeah, and then maybe let's have a quick look at the other infrastructure parts that Rancher manages. So here's where you add your custom Docker registries, which could be a Docker Hub, K, or some custom, or basically your own registry that you have deployed somewhere. You can also upload certificates. This is mainly used for the load balancer. And with the last version, we have experimental support for secrets management in Rancher, either backed by Rancher itself or by a Vault. If you know from HashiCorp, the Vault solution, it's a secret management solution that we integrate with. So this is quite something that a lot of people have waited for. And also, let's have a look at the admin view. So as I said before, we're doing role-based access control in Rancher. So this would, of course, only be visible to the ops team or to the admin. And this is where you configure your access control. So at the moment, I have configured local access control, and I can just add new accounts here. Of course, if you are integrating with your LDAP or with your AD that you have on premise, you wouldn't be able to add new accounts, but you would be able to assign privileges to existing users in your LDAP. And another aspect that is interesting to know about Rancher is that you can deploy Rancher in two scenarios or in two ways. So you can deploy just a standalone Rancher, which is basically a single container, which has a built-in MySQL database. So this is nice for basically for testing or for deploying a Rancher instance on your notebook to play around with. But for production environments, we definitely recommend to do a HA type of deploy, which basically means that you would deploy 2, 3, or 4 Rancher server instances and a single high-performant SQL database, and then put a load balancer in front of it. So most people do that on AWS with the Elastic Load Balancer and an RDS instance. But of course, a lot of people deploy their own database and then use the HA proxy or Nginx load balancer in front of Rancher. And this gives you a very resilient controlling plane. So of course, the control plane and the data and application plane are totally separated, or not totally, but almost separate in Rancher. So when your Rancher server goes down, and let's say you don't have an HA setup, but you just have a single Rancher instance, and for some reason that goes down, you merely use the management capability for a cluster, but all the services that you have already deployed on your nodes, they of course they keep running. That is, I think, good to know. And also a new feature in Rancher 1.4 is that we put webhooks in. So what that means is that you get webhooks, for example, to scale down services. And the next step will also be webhooks to scale out your infrastructure. So what you can do already here very easily is if you need to scale out your compute infrastructure, you can just hit the clone button here, for example, and then just go quickly. So this gets pre-selected with the previous options. So not in this case, but this is basically how you create a new host very quickly. But in the future, you will be able to use webhooks for that, and that means that you can set up some nice auto scaling outside of Rancher, basically querying your container metrics that we also expose. So if you go in the container view and you click on a given container, you see that we collect these metrics, usage metrics from the container, and the same is true also for the host. We also collect metrics from the host, and we expose all those in the API, and then you can just query those and then set up some thresholds, for example, for memory usage, and then call the webhook to either scale the service. So scale the service means create new containers, or also scale up the host. Yeah, so I think that would be the quick overview on the Rancher installation. And I think I'm ready to take some questions, but let me just go back to the presentation to see if there's anything left here. Yeah, so as I said before, if you didn't try out Rancher yet, it's a simple, I don't know if you see that, it's as simple as running this Docker run command, and this will give you a standalone Rancher instance. And as I said before, Rancher is open source, so all our software is available on GitHub. And we also have a Slack channel that you can connect to. So if you have any trouble getting started with Rancher, or you have any questions, you can just connect to rancher-users@slack.com, and there will be people helping you out. And also we have monthly meetups with our users. Those are quite popular. We always have around 150 to 200 participants. And those are always themed around specific aspects. And we also have, most of the times we have at least one demonstration from a Rancher user doing a demo on how he uses Rancher. So if you're interested in those, you can go to rancher.com/events, and you can sign up for our monthly meetups. So that's everything. We are through the presentation. I think we can have some questions, if there are any. Is everyone still there?
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And yeah, normally we do the Q&A via private message, but I think we can also have like direct questions today. So has anybody got a question? Oh, there's one coming in. Maybe I read it out loud. Which are the competing products?
Oh, okay. So if you're talking about Kubernetes deployment, the main competitor is Red Hat, of course, and yeah, that is our main competitor, I would say.
All right, and there is another question. What version of Kubernetes are available for Rancher?
Oh, okay, so the 1.4 version of Rancher ships with 1.5 by default. I guess you could also use a earlier version, 1.4, but there's not really a reason to do that. So because yeah, we only ship out production ready versions.
All right, then I think we have. Then there is another question related to the first question. Which are the competing products that from Red Hat? And if someone was to take an update for Rancher, is there a rollback procedure? Well, maybe first the first one. The name of the competing Red Hat product name.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so that would be the OpenShift, which is basically Red Hat's version of Kubernetes, wrapped by some management stuff around it. But this is yeah. So this is another kind of a different approach. Yeah, they are definitely locked in with Kubernetes. I think they're doing some great stuff there, but we've got a lot of people coming actually from them.
Aren't you helpful? It's so difficult to find good help these days.
It sounds difficult too. I didn't get that sentence fully.
No, I didn't get that one either. There is another question. If someone was to take an update for Rancher, is there a rollback procedure?
Yes. So as I told you before, it's for Rancher or for Kubernetes?
For Rancher.
Yeah. So you need to. So it depends, like from which version you upgrade. So if you do a major upgrade, let's say from 1.1 to 1.2, you definitely have to back up your MySQL database. Basically doing a snapshot of the 1.1 version, and then you would be able to do a rollback if you ever need to. But if you're doing like a minor version switch, rollback, that should work without restoring the database.
All right. Any more questions? Not from as far as I can see. So then I think we're done for tonight. No, there's another question coming in. What kind of scale can Rancher support?
Yeah, so I think if we talk about the environment, so Rancher is basically, you have the separation in environments, and then each environment has its own number of nodes. So when we talk about environments, what I saw, like for bigger deployments were maybe around 50 to 60 hosts in a single environment, and Rancher scales a lot better on the environment level. So if you have multiple environments, you can easily have like 50 hosts in each environment, and but if you have a single environment, I would say that is the limit for a single environment currently. 50 to 60 hosts. So the hosts are, I mean, you can run thousands of services in a single environment. So the containers are not the problem. Basically, the most load on the server is by adding additional nodes.
All right. Thank you. We do have another question. What gain do I have using Rancher instead of pure Kubernetes?
Yeah, so that is a good question. So
big question.
yeah, so sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so as I think, I don't know, I think if you followed my presentation, I hope that you got some inspiration on why it's a good idea. I mean, most people that get into Kubernetes, they want to use Kubernetes to to push their development and to be more agile in pushing out new products. So what they don't want is to be stuck with managing a Kubernetes environment, and that, as I mentioned before, upgrading Kubernetes environment is a big problem. So most of the users of Rancher, they actually what they like about it is that it makes it really simple for them to deploy Kubernetes clusters that actually work and that are very stable, and they can start deploying their own products and their applications on top of it, and don't spend a lot of time managing the Kubernetes cluster itself. And also, I mean, there are also like other features that we add on top of it. Like I said, we have a very fine-grained role-based access control in Rancher, and also the cloud agnostic approach, I think, is a plus point for Rancher, and the other infrastructure services like our overlay networking and the storage, the persistent storage backends. Of course, Kubernetes has also integrations for persistent storage, but Rancher manages those for you.
All right, very last chance to ask questions. It seems as if there were no more questions. So thank you very much for the presentation, and for all for being here with us. We will send you the link with the record in a few days, and we do not have another online meetup to announce yet, but we'll keep you updated. So thank you all very much.
Also, I should mention, if anyone is interested in getting a Rancher t-shirt and stickers, just write me an email at jan@rancher.com.
I think that is a very nice end, that we can have shirts.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening in. Appreciate it, and I hope to see you again, maybe in the Rancher community, open source community.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good day and see you next time. Bye.